edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, I'd like to talk a little bit about a category of employment-based petitions where you don't need an employer to petition you. Okay, many times I'll get over the years people who will say, um, how can I get an employment-based visa? And I'll say, well, first you need a sponsor, an employer, and then go into all the requirements. And then their next question usually is, well, can you find me a sponsor? Which case I can't help them in that regard. But, of course, once they do, I can determine if there's qualification and then prepare the petition. However, there is a category of employment-based petitions that do not need an employer to sponsor you. And in fact, it's referred to as the extraordinary ability alien, where you can self-petition yourself. Okay? Now, the name itself should give you some pause because it is not an easy petition to get approved. Again, it's called the Extraordinary Ability Alien Petition, and the nomenclature is EB1A. Okay, so on the EB1A, you basically have to be the very top of whatever field it is you do. Okay, and that's not just in your local town, that's essentially internationally, or on at least a minimum on a national stage. And so, I've had people who, think very highly of themselves, and they try to put the EB1A together only to get denied, and they can't understand why it was denied. Okay. First of all, they do have a list of 8 different things, categories that you can put as evidence of why you are extraordinary ability. But unlike what many people think, the law says you have to have at least 3, but the law doesn't say anywhere that if you have what you think fits under 3 of the categories, that automatically you're in, and that it is required for the adjudicating officer to allow you to come in as an extraordinary alien. And that's not the case. The case is this is one of the most highly discretionary petitions in all of immigration. And the reality is that it has to be put together in such a manner that it's professional, that it shows how you are of extraordinary ability in this particular field and why it should be granted. There is a great deal of argument and legal analysis that goes into successfully putting in a petition for an extraordinary ability alien. So if you did this yourself and you got denied and you're wondering why, that's why. Okay. So the first thing I do when someone thinks that they qualify is I look at their CV, their curriculum vitae, and or the resume. I look at their awards, certificates, publications. I look at everything to get just a feel initially if they would qualify or not. And then once I determine that there's a reasonable chance of qualification, then the hard work begins, and then it's a matter of putting it all together and making coherent arguments as to why it falls under the particular category. Now, what's one thing I do to make it easier? Well, you have to try to narrow the field. Okay, so let's just say we're talking about engineering. Okay, if you try to come in as an extraordinary ability engineer, that's not going to happen, because there are civil engineers, aeronautical engineers, mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, computer engineers, petroleum engineers. I mean, it goes on. And if you just say, extraordinary ability or EB1A in engineering, then immigration is going to look at all the top engineers from every single field, and you'll be kicked out for sure. So what I do is I start narrowing it. So first then I ask, okay, well, what kind of engineer are you? And, they might say, okay, mechanical engineer. So then, at least we've narrowed it down to the type of engineering. But even then, with mechanical engineering, that's too broad. So I say, okay, well, what kind of mechanical engineer? What do you normally work on? So sometimes they'll say, well, I've done 30 years with Boeing. I go, okay. So that's good. So you're working in aviation as a mechanical engineer. What part of the plane are you working on? And they might say, well, they're working on the system that deals with the retraction of the wheels and so forth, as a mechanical engineer. Or if we were narrowing it to an aeronautical engineer, they might be working on the dash electrical systems and so forth. So I narrow it, narrow it, narrow it so that it becomes a very small field. And if it's a very small subfield of the bigger one, then it's a whole lot easier to show they're at the top of that field than to show they're at the top of the whole general area. So that's, one very important factor that I always do in order to have a higher chance of success of the EB1A. So, given that, the EB1A doesn't need to have a PERM, or what used to be called labor certification, doesn't need to have an employer. You only need to basically certify that if you get the EB1A, you'll continue working in that field, and then you can work anywhere you want in that field after if it gets approved. So it's a great, great employment-based petition, but it is a very difficult one that takes a great deal of work and consideration in order to put it through. So if you have any questions, just give me a call. Let me know. If you like the video, click like, subscribe, and more videos on the coming weeks. Thank you.